Good evening, and welcome to Friday Nights Live at the Parish Art Museum. I'm Alicia Longwell. I'm the Louis B. and Dorothy Coleman Chief Curator here at the museum, and we are deeply grateful for our supporting sponsor, Bank of America, and especially to our patrons, Sandy and Steve Pearlbinder. I'd also like to thank Art Bridges for the very generous support for this special project about Fairfield Porter and this evening's presentation. I hope many of you have had the opportunity to see the exhibition Housebound on now at the Parish Art Museum. It seemed to me that perhaps as we were all sitting through months of being housebound ourselves, we might think about Fairfield Porter and that incredible group of poets and painters in his circle who so often visited the house at 49 South Main Street. Also, the house was much more than an active family place with his 5 growing children. He also used it so often for the subjects of his paintings. And I can think of no one in that circle more house proud and house centric than the poet John Ashbery. And those of the friends and fellow artists that came together there, Ashbery certainly showed very, very many affinities with Porter. And I can think of no one better to talk about John Ashbery with than Karin Roffman. She is here with us tonight. She is the senior lecturer in the humanities, English, and American Studies, and associate director of public humanities at Yale University. She most recently published the book, The Songs We Know Best. Shameless product placement. It's a fabulous book. I think so, but so did the New York Times in 2017 when it was on the list of the 100 best and most notable books of 2017. She's currently working on a full biography of the poet. I first met Karin when I asked her to work with me on the exhibition Seen Unseen, Jane Freilicher and Jane Wilson. Karin contributed a brilliant essay on Jane Freilicher, and I know many of you will be thrilled to know that her next project after her full-length biography on Ashbery will be a biography of Jane Freilicher. So there's something else very important that you've done concerning Ashbery. It's called John Ashbery's Nest. It's a rather spectacular interactive program. Unfortunately, we'll only have the stills here, but we'll have Karin to explain them to us. But it's about Ashbery's house in Hudson. So I thought we would start by looking at some of those images. If we want to bring up the first image from this John Ashbery's Nest, and you can all just Google John Ashbery's Nest, it will come on. It was a collaborative effort with the Yale University Digital Humanities Labs. And it's quite, it's very revealing and very interesting. But first, Karin, let me ask you something. I guess we went to the slides, so our face is missing. Okay.
No, I can see you.
Okay, good. Tell us what first drew you to John Ashbery, his work, his life, because it's been quite an endeavor.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And thanks so much for having me here. This is really fun. We had a great conversation the other day preparing for this, and this is fun to talk about. John Ashbery was a poet that I found, deeply mysterious and really interesting. And I was teaching him at Bard in a class on poets and painters. And he was emeritus then at Bard. This was way back in the spring of 2005. It was my first teaching job. And a student asked me if we could ask him to come to class and talk about things. That he does that he's at Bard, he's emeritus, he'll come. And I sort of dragged my feet about it all semester, and then finally asked him. Was told that I had to call him, which was terrifying, that he didn't do email, which wasn't true. And so I did, I called, and he answered on the first ring. My only hope was that he wasn't going to answer, but it turned out to be the most fortuitous thing. He answered. It was something like 2 days later, maybe a day later. It was something kind of rude, to ask him to come to class so soon. I had so dragged my feet. And so he came to class, and he's, you know, as when he passed away, the outpouring of, you know, accounts of his gentleness and kindness and humor were just, it was just amazing. And that really was a sort of feeling that one got. He drove himself to my class and talked with the students, and was amazing, and invited me to see his house. And that's how we started to talk about the house.
Okay.
I had been doing, by the way, a project up until then on Marion Moore, Marion Moore and other women writers and their houses, and the way they thought about the museums and libraries, and how they set up sort of organizational systems through their work in museums and libraries in their houses. And so I had been working on a project on Marion Moore's things and how she collects. And so I was really, really interested once I saw the house, and also completely shocked because I expected it to be a kind of modernist cube. And it was this 1894 Victorian house in Hudson. I was very surprised. Of course, it makes total sense after thinking about it some more, but the darkness of the house, the gloominess, the coziness of it, and all the things in it were just something that I couldn't stop thinking about.
So let me just interject one thing I forgot at the top of the program. If you'll see at the bottom of your screen, our viewers, there's a chat section and a Q&A section. Please send us questions, comments, and as we have time, we will read them at the very end of our talk. So Karin, set the scene for us. You said Hudson.
Okay, so here we are. This was just like a lucky thing, and this is the way into Ashbery's Nest. The day we did the shoot with these amazing two guys who do 360 photography, they brought a friend who was trying out drones. And so we were playing with drones all afternoon, and one of the shots was just super. And Monica Ang-Reid, who was the graphic designer for this project at Yale in the Digital Humanities Lab, and is also a poet, and was just the most amazing spirit and collaborator, thought this would be a wonderful way into the nest. And you know, this really smart grad student came up to me after a talk one day and said, "Oh, it's a convex mirror, right?" Which I hadn't thought about it, but of course it's perfect. And
it's a famous poem,
right? His famous poem, "Self-Portrait in a Convex Mirror."
Right.
So this is the way he bought the house in 1978. So if we go to the next slide, one of the magic things that Monica did was, you'll see if you go to the house, John, this is the early picture when he was, you know, soon after he bought the house, he appears and disappears. And, you know, the project was done before he passed away. He saw part of it. But after he passed away, it was sort of extra special to see the appearance and disappearance of him. I find it very moving. Okay. So then I'm taking you now on a little bit of a backwards tour of the house, because we're going to go upstairs and look at, because I wanted to connect it right away with Fairfield Porter, and to go to the room where one of the Fairfield Porter paintings is. So we're actually going upstairs right away to the sitting room, which was one of his favorite rooms. You can see the old TV on the left, in the corner. And this is a tiny Fairfield Porter painting. It was of Maine, given to him by Anne Porter about a year after Fairfield Porter died. So in about 76, it was given to him.
It's propped on the mantelpiece, right?
It's that thing right underneath the picture. Mm-hmm. Actually, if we go to the next slide, you'll be able to see it much better. Okay. So there it is, actually in New York City. It was originally, he brought it to New York City after she gave it to him, and then eventually brought it to the house and put it on the mantle. And I wanted to read something. If we go to the next slide, there's an even closer, slide of the painting. You know, John only visited Great Spruce Head Island once in '69, and after he went, Fairfield Porter sent this amazing letter to him about how much he liked his writing, and I'll just read you just this little piece of it because it's so beautiful, and I think it has to do with how maybe sentimental, but a certain kind of affection and that led him to put the painting where it is, which is really actually kind of hidden and only for him and David, who live in the house. You don't really see it. It's not in one of the main rooms. It's not downstairs. So anyway, what Fairfield Porter wrote was, John, I loved your short note. Your prose style, particularly in letters, no matter how short, is something that I savor with as much pleasure as I do your poems. It's amazing to me that such casual communication can have so graceful a form, that each word can have so much vitality. We have only a week and a half more here, which gives me a melancholy feeling. From day to day, it is never the same, though. Each day is like a word in one of your sentences. Isn't that lovely?
Beautiful. Of course, Great Spruce Head is the island off the coast of Maine, and Penobscot Bay, where it was a family retreat of the Porter family. So a lot of visitors there. I didn't realize Ashbery only came once. That's interesting. It was a far trek.
Yeah. So if we go to the next slide. Yeah. So this is not this is a painting that Ashbery made at Southampton, not Maine, in Southampton, just the corner of the mantelpiece. It was in 1955, shortly before he left for Europe, and they were having a conversation about poetry and painting, which they often did, and he decided to try to paint. He had grown up painting as a child and hadn't really painted then in a while. After he went to Harvard, he didn't paint. So this was really a kind of a special painting that he made at the house.
It's wonderful. I thought we could perhaps find a snippet of this mantelpiece in some of Porter's paintings, but so far I didn't find it. It's interesting. We'll keep on the lookout.
I should have brought added, but I didn't. I'm sorry. That about a year after he painted this, when he was in Europe, he sent Porter a postcard with Vuillard's mantelpiece painting on it that he saw at the Tate, and bought a postcard of it and sent it, which was, a nice shorthand for the last time they had spent together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see. The next painting, the next picture is, this is back in the sitting room. So you see the painting right up there on the left, and you can see a little bit of a Trevor Wingfield collage right above it. And next to the chair, I picked this angle. You'll see when we get to the paintings, Porter's paintings, that there's one that is a very similar angle, and it looks quite similar. So you'll have this in mind. The painting in the back is of a light bulb, the sort of gray painting by Rodrigo Moynihan. And then on the mantelpiece next to the Porter are all these Staffordshire figurines, which he collected, that his grandparents had them too, and he remembered, sort of liking to look at them, and had a collection. And in the way back of this photograph, you see his collection of miniature shoes and hats in the back. He was close to those grandparents, right? Very, very close to his grandparents. Yeah, it was his mother's father. Mm-hmm. And he, in fact, lived with him for more than a year when he was in kindergarten, so he could start kindergarten, because there was no kindergarten in Sodus, where he grew up, which was a rural farm town. And they lived in Rochester at the time, where there was a really good elementary school, where his mother had gone also. And so he lived there for a little over a year and loved it, really didn't want to go back to the farm. Okay, the next one is, so continuing this tour of the upstairs, this is his bedroom. The bed is on the other side. I picked this one. You'll see, again, there's a Porter painting that you'll see coming up that's, it's a different angle, but it's also a vanity like this. And the upstairs is full of friends, and the friends are on the wall. So where one of those dots are on the left is a Jane Freilicher painting of cherries, and next to that, the shaving cream is red grooms. Yes, I see a question. Is the wallpaper by William Morris? Yes, it's the cabbage rose pattern. And I just was recently teaching one of his essays on Cornell, where he talks about cabbage roses in seeing Cornell's house. And so one is always finding these like recurring themes with some of his choices that come from sort of long-standing thinking about art. And then on top of the vanity is the bottom of a Neil Welliver painting. And even on the vanity itself, on the left under that light is a tiny Jane Freilicher painting, and on the right under the other light, the green painting is a little painting from his friend, the painter Anne Dunn. And then there's that little round thing is his mother's powder box that he remembered loving the sound of it closing in the afternoons.
And of course, in the interactive, the website, as you pass over these numbers, it will tell you these stories and more.
Yes, I mean, it was one of Monica Ungreed's, sort of brilliant ideas when we were sort of mapping out how to do this. The idea was to be able to make it flexible enough that I could have as many as I wanted, multiple little panels that could equal a story of, through small. Some are 30 words, some are 120, but all of them are really short little anecdotes about the object, but specific ones about his relationship to the objects and the objects themselves and where the objects appear in the poems.
So wonderful. And of course, wallpaper is a leitmotif throughout the Porter house, which they used a lot.
Yeah, and the William Morris, he really, really looked for that. I have letters and letters where he was searching, to find exactly the wallpaper that he wanted for each of the rooms. There's William Morris paper in all the rooms upstairs except for the center hall, which has grass cloth. And then downstairs in the butler's pantry, there's William Morris paper also. Okay, so now we're going to go downstairs. So the next slide, this is the first floor library. And so all of these rooms, this is like you'll see that they go in sort of order of publicness. So I love this room. It's what he called a kind of a room that maybe like a traveling 19th century gentleman would have put together. It has a kind of Italian theme running through it. And it also has his ceramic collection, which is, this picture has some of it on the mantle, on the top of that little bookcase, but there's another mantle that you'll see, it has just a ton of ceramics. And he wrote about an exhibition on ceramics and became incredibly knowledgeable about American ceramics particularly. So there's a little George Orr mug on the mantle, and Roseville, Van Bruegel. He was really full. Is it Fulder?
What?
No, I'm just trying to remember the name of the ceramic, but he had a collection of all the different ceramics, really like one or two from each of the different ceramic makers, and started to use the word ceramic in poems in a really interesting way. There's one poem, Unctuous Platitudes, that has the phrase "in the ceramic day," and you see ceramic sort of coming up more and more as he becomes more interested in the subject. Okay, we're going to the dining room next.
The lampshades.
The lampshades. Yeah, sorry. Can we go back? Right. He was a great. There's lamps everywhere in this house, as in Porter's house. Interesting lamps, and he was also carried lampshades. Would find one in San Francisco and carry it on carry it on the train, and because he didn't really like to fly, and bring it to bring it to the house. Okay, the next slide is actually not in Nest. It's going to be one of the great things I think about a digital project is that you can keep working on it.
Right.
I didn't find this. I looked and looked and looked for a photograph of the dining room set like this, and just found it recently and was super excited about it. And I added it to this collection because it's so different from the table settings that are in Porter's paintings. This is so formal, and so I wanted to include it. If you go to the next slide, what it looks like in Nest is this. For the last 10 years of his life, Ashbery was making collages. I mean, he was making collages since college, but he had several collage shows starting in 2008, and the dining room table became a center of collage making. So when we were taking the pictures for Nest, this is what the table looked like. It really looked like this for basically 10 years. Okay, I just have a couple more. The next one is I wanted to just show you some of his collections, and this is one of my favorites. It's a blue glass collection, and it's actually in two places. One is in the dining room and one is in this butler's pantry. And he put them near the windows and really liked the way that they looked next to the light. And one of the great fun things about this project was when I would discover a collection that he had really done a lot of research on and really thought about so much, and then I would find the word or the idea in a poem, the thing in a poem, and usually in a really surprising way. It really changed the way that I read his poetry, because often he used it in a way you wouldn't expect, but that thing then became a kind of grounding thing in a poem, and you could see the specificity even in a phrase that seemed kind of abstract. So the phrase where blue glass comes in is so beautiful, actually, in this poem "Merrily We Live," which was in Your Name Here in 2000. The phrase that it's in is, "So we have only our trapezoidal reflections to look at in its blue glass sides and perhaps admire." Isn't that pretty?
Mhm.
But the phrase "blue glass sides," you wouldn't think that that's anything but a kind of you know, imaginative riff, but in fact it's an imaginative riff on a very specific item. And I think that it really it helps one understand how the poems are constructed from things.
Right.
Okay, so the next one, oh, the next collection is the Daffy Duck collection. And so Daffy Duck, he wrote a poem, Daffy Duck in Hollywood, and there's a cartoon called Daffy Duck in Hollywood, and he had just gone to a cartoon festival shortly before he wrote the poem. But after the poem, both before the poem and after, he collected Daffy Duck memorabilia. He said at some point, "Daffy Duck, c'est moi," after Flaubert, which was pretty funny. And this is a collection of Daffy Duck glasses, like the kind that you would collect at Burger King or something like that. And he had a collection of 8, and the day that I was interviewing him about this, he was pulling them out, and he had some in New York and he finally had the whole collection in the butler's pantry, and wanted to leave them there and have them on display. He had a lot of Daffy Duck things, both in New York and in the house, and then people made paintings for him with Daffy Duck in them. And there's actually one slide with Elizabeth Hazen's painting of Daffy Duck, who's Jane Freilicker's daughter.
Great. Why Daffy? What do you think about Daffy Duck from childhood? Had you seen?
Well, actually, I think he was. I've been researching the history of Daffy Duck, and the animator Tex Avery, who created him and was the director of many of those early Daffy Duck cartoons, and he was quite a genius. And in thinking about this character, so the very first time Daffy Duck appears. He's pretty quiet, but he's already got that kind of, freedom to sort of do whatever he wants. There's one time when Ashbery was reading up the Daffy Duck in Hollywood poem, and he said, yes, it's about that malevolent mallard, Daffy Duck. And I think there is a sense of Daffy Duck's ability through that character to kind of wreak havoc through a certain kind of malevolent humor that I think was appealing. So maybe there's some of that.
His alter ego.
Yeah, a little bit. So then, the last couple slides are in the music room. So the next one, this is the first painting that Porter did, and we'll talk about this later. The slide comes up one more time, but this painting is now in the National Portrait Gallery on loan, and he had strong feelings about it, but we'll talk about it later. So I'll move to the next slide. This was a later painting. The one on the left is a Fairfield Porter painting from 1957 with Ashbery in a blue shirt, and many of you might know it because it's on the cover of Selected Prose, the book that Eugene Ritchie edited. And above Ashbery in this picture is a Susan Dakin assassination scene, which you might be surprised to see in sort of the most public room of the house. This is the most public and the fanciest room of the house. There's a chandelier at the top, and there's this wallpaper here that's not William Morris. It was actually ceiling paper that he decided to use as the paper of the room. And that lamp underneath the Fairfield Porter, the dome lamp, it's this unbelievably fragile, beautiful lamp that when you turn it on, it illuminates the trees. And so there's this feeling of, one of his first great poems, Some Trees, even in these objects around the house. Mm. And the last slide I have is of the music room. So that one was about in the 80s, and this one was the way that the room was at the end of his life. The Fairfield Porter had moved by that time, and the de Kooning lithograph was there. Things moved around a lot for a while. Things moved from different rooms, and if you go to Nest, you'll see I included as many photographs in a narrative as I could to show you sort of where the paintings moved, both around the rooms, but also to New York and back. So there's the de Kooning lithograph, and then across from it is Alex Katz's White Rose. And then next to the Susan Dakin assassination scene is an Elion painting that they were very, very good friends, and Elion gave him many paintings, but he bought that particular one when he went back to France on a Guggenheim, I think. Mm-hmm. So that's the sense of the house. I hope that gives some sense of Nest.
It's wonderful, Karin, and the good news is we can all go at our leisure and go to the website and thoroughly digest. There are arrows everywhere to point you the next room as you walk into it. It's quite wonderful. I guess that's totally dismantled now, and
it's quite dismantled, yeah. So this serves as a different kind of record than it did at the beginning when the house was still right. But the house is actually, I think it's on the market now, and yeah. It's almost everything is gone. Please put the websites in the chat. Okay. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. I'll do that.
Okay. A minute ago.
And then I forgot to mention one thing about Nest is that each object has Ashbery or one of many people that I interviewed speaking about the object. So I interviewed his antique dealer, Vito Giallo, who was amazing, and a lot of poets who spent a lot of time at the house. Eugene Ritchie talks about about it, about, you know, his experience helping Ashbery pick fabric. And
Mhm.
I hope, and in this room, I was thinking about it because at the piano, you hear Ashbery singing tunes that he loves. So, which just happened in an interview, and we were actually upstairs when it happened, but I put it where it belonged, at the piano. And so I guess the thing to say is just that it's, to me now, listening to it is a real sort of record of his own feelings about the house and his own feelings about things and his friends' visits to the house. So that's a kind of moving part of it.
You know, I mean, it's all very moving to think about this as a legacy, you know, his entire life and the research you've done, which will be accessible forever. I mean, it's very impressive. You're teaching a course right now called
Uh, Film, music, and art in John Ashbery's poetry. It's been super fun. Great bunch of students.
Terrific, terrific. So, all right, now we're going to look at a few paintings in more detail of Porter's, just to talk a little bit about this. And Karin, chime in because you know as much about this as I. This is a painting, early painting from 47. That is Anne Porter, his extraordinary wife, poet, Anne Channing Porter. This is a scene from when they lived in basically a New York brownstone briefly after their marriage, 1947. And I think you'll probably recognize that Audubon print over the mantelpiece, which turns up in so many more paintings of Porter's. I have a feeling it might have been, or he might have had it very early on. It hasn't been documented in that way, but it sort of moves around the house, which is another thing that seems interesting in the Southampton house. Different objects that you recognize will be in different places as the years went on. Just below that is a carriage clock, which again is sort of, these two are central over the mantelpiece in this first house, and it too moves around, but it's always there. Now, another very interesting, leaning against the top of the bookshelf, you can see there, and we don't have a pointer. That's a letter from that Emily Dickinson wrote to William Wentworth Higginson, who was a famous Civil War colonel, actually led the first all freed Black battalion in South Carolina. He was also an abolitionist, a poet, a writer, editor, and he was married. His first wife was a Mary Channing, and I think probably whose father was Walter Channing, and that is also the name on Anne's family side. So at one point this was given to her, and that too you will see move around throughout their lives together in places where they lived, certainly in South Main Street, and always sort of propped against again, never hung on the wall, but always sort of propped. In the center, I'm told from the writing on the piece that it is one of some of Elliot Porter's photographs. The very well-known photographer was Fairfield's older brother. And on the right, a painting from the 30s by de Kooning, which I was not able to find a full image for. It's sort of a procession of people, mostly women, I think, looking rather Puvis de Chavannes there. But anyway, early, he was a vast admirer of de Kooning. They were always great friends. Of course, de Kooning was a figurative painter throughout much of his career, and Porter just felt an amazing affinity with him. And then talking about the shades, you can see what's interesting in the way the treatment of these glass shades in a lot of the photographs. And this lamp will reappear throughout their lives, as well as the shadows, the light, not the shadows, the light that it casts, which he loved incorporating into the painting. And also I read that the rosewood table, a real tea table, was another sort of family treasure made by a relative. So there that is.
I love her pose with her hand like that meditative.
Yeah, it's funny. She even commented in a letter, I think, to a family member. She said she thought she looked rather louche and sort of coquettish in the pose.
Oh, that's funny.
But yeah, it is funny. Fairfield's grandfather. All right, we're getting
Oh, that's interesting.
more information. Fairfield's grandfather. Okay, we'll have to go back to these. We'll go back to all the comments. Okay, next, please. And here, just this is the reference, Karin, that you made to one of the vanities with the mirror. And these are all also early. This would have been probably in New York before the move to Southampton. But this bed, again, the four-poster follows them throughout. And some of the furniture actually, I believe, came from Winnetka, where he was born and raised, the house there. They held on to the furniture. All right, next.
This was before they met. Oh yeah, now 1952. That's when they met.
Yes, here we are. Again, this is Lawrence at the typewriter. This is the main living room in Southampton. Again, the wallpaper. There's our friend the Raven, Nevermore on the wall. And again, this beautiful, beautiful play of the light from this the green glass shade. That's his third son, Lawrence, and working assiduously. There's a small telephone there. As William Carlos Williams said, no idea but in things. If it was there, Porter would paint it. And very interesting. And many of the works in this period were, of course, in Maine. He would do more landscapes, but in Southampton, principally the works are of the family in the house. Next. Another scene of the living room. I like the mantle sort of playing, almost seems to play a role in these paintings. The mantles being very solid and anchored. His father was an architect who primarily worked for himself. He wasn't a large scale builder or designer rather, but the home in Winnetka was Greek Revival, and he was very much a classicist. So I sometimes think of these, the beautiful Greek Revival. I didn't say much about the house. It was from the 1850s in Southampton, called a captain's house because it was a prosperous captain who owned it there. But of course, the interiors are so often with the focused on a mantelpiece. You see here on the left, Lizzie and Katie and Anne. This rug turns up repeatedly in images. The small rocking chairs for the children. Next. You want to talk a little bit about Nest of Ninnies?
Oh, sure. Well,
Nest of for 10 years.
What?
Did they write it really over a period of 10 years?
More than that. It was about 17 years, 15 years probably till they finished it. They started it that summer that John and Fairfield met in 1952 when Jane Freilicher introduced them. Right. And they were John and Jane and Frank O'Hara, Jimmy Schuyler were making this little film and near Georgia Pond and called Presenting Jane. And so they spent a couple weekends out there. And on the drive back to New York one day, they started this novel, Nest of Ninnies, and they did it in all different ways, alternating chapters, alternating paragraphs, and eventually, through sheer force of will, I actually don't know how they managed to work on it. I mean, taking such long breaks over so many years, and then they finally finished it. And if you haven't read it, it's kind of delightful. It's and it's full of things, and wry observations about people.
That's another question. Jimmy Schuyler, another poet in this intimate circle, you might say. That's the couch in the hayloft studio that Porter sort of retrofitted. It was a stable and above a hayloft, and he made his studio there. He opened up a window wall, as you can see, and that multifloral couch, which he really took delight in painting by all accounts, is well documented as having come from Winnetka with them. So that's been around as well.
I'm always struck also by how sort of serious and intense Ashbery looks in some of these paintings by Porter over years. When I mean he was a very funny person and also very intense, but the intensity I think comes through more in some of these paintings than the humor.
Okay, next. This is an extraordinary painting, not in our collection. This is in the collection of the Hirshhorn, a great, as you can tell by the scale, from 1963. Anne had a bout of hepatitis. She was, they didn't go up to Maine right away that summer, and she was sort of in her sick bed, as you can see, during the beautiful summer weather. Unlikely subject for a painting, you might say. Porter rather obliquely titles it July Interiors, so that in a way the subject is not so much Anne, but what's surrounding her. Up on the wall again, framed and sort of occluded because of the glass, is Elliot Porter photograph. And there's the carriage clock. This is in the dresser in the back of the room. There's the letter that Emily Dickinson wrote to Higginston. And there is Anne. Yes, I was going to just remark on that. There's the four-poster bed, which has obviously been brought within their whole married lives. The sewing basket. She's taken off her glasses, we assume, after reading this large tome. That's a Russian icon of the Virgin Mary way up over the bed between the wall sconces. And rather improbably, that princess phone, which I see referred to as plastic and something, that was a princess phone. I know, because I desperately hoped my family would get one, and we didn't, never. But it seems quite incongruous here. I'm going to assume that was the only phone available at that time. It was considered very chic in the latest trend. Of course, what's really remarkable is that red and white striped tablecloth. One has to wonder if that indeed was really there, but I think it must have been. It's quite an extraordinary painting. It reminds me of a very wonderful article written by an art historian. It's called, I don't have an image of it, but it's all about the golden ratio. I can't see myself. Can you see that now? Mm-hmm. It's sort of diagrammatic of the golden ratio, which is a formula from descended from classical art, where everything, she's the center. And it does deconstruct that way, but it reminded me of something that John Ashbery wrote about Fairfield Porter. If you tried to deconstruct one of his paintings into the absolute geometric forms, you'd probably run into trouble. Ashbery wrote, "Order seems to come from searching for disorder, and awkwardness from searching for harmony. When you arrange, you fail." So he wrote that once, and I think it sort of sums up a lot of what Ashbery felt about Porter's paintings as well.
Yeah, I was rereading all the different essays that he wrote about Porter for the 10 years after he died, and because there were so many actually short and long essays that he wrote about him, and he really seemed to think so much about the looseness, he talks about the late work having a kind of looseness that the earlier work didn't have, that it's still set in the same places, but that there's a sense of things just kind of happening rather than anybody making them happen. And I think that was such a like an important idea for him about art in general, that art could reflect a happening, rather than put an organization on something.
I hear that. And of course, both Porter and Ashbery wrote art criticism throughout their lives. Looked at other paintings a lot. Next. This is beautiful, beautiful image. This is the front hall. It's a beautiful Greek Revival house, and you see in the front hall the wallpaper. And you particularly like this one, Karin.
Yeah, I like the narrow space and the lamp and all the shadows, which has a very feeling of Ashbery.
Yeah.
He had lamps just like that also.
Next. Thank you. Two beautiful tabletops. Still like with stapler. Maybe that object is a stapler we've been puzzling over, an old-fashioned sort of stapler of some kind. But this is a good example of Ashbery noting the painting got looser in a way. This time from the earlier one from 53 and then from 1970. The joke was that Porter always said, "Don't clear away the breakfast dishes. I'm going to paint those." And indeed he did, with something as banal as a box of cereal as well. But that ever encompassing eye just inside the house as to what will I paint today.
Yeah, the phrase that Ashbery used was that the paintings do not appear, like the subject of the paintings don't appear sought after, as much as simply happening to one.
Perfect. Okay, next. Oh, here are the three paintings.
Yeah, the one on the right we talked about the other day. It's new to me, and it's exciting to see. And I'm curious whether this was a year after the 1952 one that John had a lot of feelings about.
Not like, right?
Yeah, I don't think he felt, he wrote to Fairfield Porter like a couple years after doing it, having had the portrait made. Is it mellowing yet? Has it mellowed yet? I think it felt a little bit truthful to him. A little raw.
No, actually, the one on the right is in the parish collection. We had always had it as untitled and the subject not known. And then I read, I should have noted where, Ashbery wrote about it. He wrote about this painting where you don't see my face, but that is me. Then, of course, the work from 57. Okay, next. I wanted to include this. This is an article. There was a series in Art News of articles. So-and-so, an artist, paints a picture. Extraordinary writers. Porter wrote many. This one on Porter is by Frank O'Hara. And as you can see, he's working in the living room. Can we just go to the next slide briefly? There he is. There's a huge grandfather clock, which is someone who stayed in the house for a while one summer, noted that all the clocks had to be wound by hand. So they were periodically all going off and all chiming at the wrong times. His collection, he collected ukiyo-e Japanese prints, which you see sort of on the side of the chimney there. And this is, of course, a portrait of his youngest daughter, his oldest daughter, Katie, with Ann Porter's sitting with her and reading to her to keep her occupied in a way, but I think they all must have been the most patient of families. I wanted to just read one thing that Ashbery wrote about the house and the family, which I find so interesting. There had been a critic who had written something about Porter who she actually knew the family and had been in the house. This was actually Claire White of the McKim Mead and White family. And she wrote that the Porters are quiet, intense, and rather fey, and seem to live on an enchanted planet of their own. Actually, Ashbery writes this in an essay for the posthumous retrospective at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. So Ashbery goes on. Porter objected strongly to Mrs. White's characterization, as we can well understand. And Ashbery goes on to say, he did not give a reason for his objection, and perhaps none was necessary, but Mrs. White could not have really been blamed for her assessment. There was an element of truth in it, despite the discomfort it caused Porter. His house in Southampton was an enchanting place, large and gracious, but always a little messy and charmingly dilapidated. One of the bathrooms was more than that. While in an upstairs hall, the wallpaper hung in festoons, and no one seemed to mind. The children were strangely beautiful, wide-eyed and withdrawn, and they spoke like adults. There were idiosyncratically chosen paintings by de Kooning, Larry Rivers, and Leon Hartle, a little-known artist whom Porter admired enormously. And on the walls, along with Audubon and ukiyo-e prints and a strange Turner drawing, there was a lovely smell in the house, made up of good cooking, oil paint, books, and fresh air from the sea. I think it's quite a lovely tribute to his longtime friend. Should we look at some of the questions and chats?
Sure.
Got quite a few. I know some came up while we were in the middle. This from David Porter. Fairfield's grandfather, William Furness, was a Civil War colonel, also in charge of an African-American brigade. Isn't that interesting? Thank you, David. Yes, the Princess phone. Lin Chen asks, whose painting is the one over the desk? Not quite sure what we were looking at then.
Oh, we were looking at the Ann Porter on the bed
Oh, yeah.
at the time.
That's an Elliot Porter photograph, I'm told. Do you know what medium he used in his oils? He did use something called a Maragé technique by the person who used it. It had a lot of white lead in it. And he liked the way that he would say you can put it and you paint it and it stays put. It was a fairly esoteric method which he did use. Should we go to the Q&As? Okay.
Sure. Oh, is the house still standing and where is it? It's in Hudson, New York. It is still standing. It's very recognizable because it's near the square. And it is not open to the public. It's a private house. Yeah. Did you put together the project while writing the biography? Yes. So in fact, I was working on the house for many years, and I had gotten this grant in 2009 to be in the house every single day and interview Ashbery and David Kermani and do research on all the objects. And I just couldn't finish the project without knowing more about his childhood, because so many of the objects were from his childhood, things that he'd brought there from his grandparents, etc. So I started doing research. I went up to see his childhood houses, which were part of his imagination of this house, which was the only house he's ever owned. And I had always really wanted to write a biography, and it took me a long time to get the courage to ask him if I could, because I knew he'd said no to other people. But by the time I did, I'd been doing so much work that he said he thought I already was. So it turned out to be a quite easy thing. And so I wrote the biography, while doing it.
Wonderful. Someone asked about 49 South Main. It is still there in good hands. It's well loved. And someone contributes, Mr. Ashbery's long generative experience of living in Paris is well documented. If it's of interest to you, would you speak to other locations, experiences we might not be aware of, and how they might have impacted his later work and interests?
I mean, it's interesting, actually. I think that the house, this house, the Hudson house, impacted his later work and interests, perhaps even more than all the various apartments he lived in Paris or in New York before then. Because he was able to, because this house was 4,000 square feet, because it was the only house he ever owned, he was able to fill it with things. So a lot of the poems where he uses those words of objects that are in the house and he uses them in these new ways are late poems. And I think part of the reason is because he could actually follow his collection interests all the way to the end point of them, because he actually had room to see things. I was saying the other day that one of the interviews I had with him was just going through drawers, and he was taking out one object after another that he hadn't seen in a while and talking about them. The interview was like maybe close to 6 hours long of just looking at objects. He really had a deep interest and knowledge of the things that he collected. And so, and he wanted to see them. So the house provided that experience of seeing, whereas his apartments in Paris, which he thought about and talked about a lot. I mean, one of the apartments in Paris, it had no heat. And while he was getting colder and colder, he's writing poem about rivers freezing. So there are ways that the life that he was living was getting into poems. But I think in terms of the later work, I think you see that a lot. You see the relationship between the Hudson House and the later work a lot.
Okay. Karin, this has been extraordinary to speak with you about Ashbery and Porter, and just some of your depth of knowledge. It's wonderful. I can't wait to go back to the website. And thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been so fun to learn about. and I hope I get to go see the exhibition in person. I can't wait.
Let me know. And also, please put the website in the chat. Okay. Well, can you?
I will try to do that right now.
Okay. Or just Google.
Yeah, it's true. If you Google John Ashbery's Nest, you will find it.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to look at my collections in a whole new way. I'm going to put them all out on view. It's wonderful. Good
Thanks
night.
so much.
I want to thank, once again, Bank of America, our lead sponsor, for helping us bring these delightful evenings. Okay. Thanks, Karin. Good night.
Thanks again. Bye.
Bye.